Everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Get healthy. I mix what I like,
We're here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy liked and other cool things.
Yes, what's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like right here on Black Liberation Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Welcome to our part 10 of 100 Years of Malcolm X, and the series inspired by
Don't read, beloved.
that will culminate May 19th on the 100th birthday of Malcolm X. Been really having a fun time with this series. And as much as I don't like having to pre-record most of them, as is the case with this one, the last few will be live. Looking forward to that. But as it is now, I'm on my way to my 4-4. The only 4-4 I carry is a course load. And but I am again still happy to be hosting this series and want to welcome everybody. Please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon. All the links are in the show description. Put this in your socials, invite others to join you. Please do not be stingy. There is no need for that on what is sort of the preparatory show for the prelude for the week of Remix Morning shows, the best morning show in the history of all media. My apologies to the show for Friday morning last week, my absence, my unplanned absence, and the massive tech issues that I ran into. And thanks to the comrades for stepping in and for the Undefeated chat doing its thing. And salute, though, to Morehouse College, and particularly Dr. Andrew Douglas for inviting me and others, including Kamal, who I got to hang out with briefly, break bread with, and panel with. salute to all of them for what was a really fun time. Let me with at a symposium. Let's see. At a symposium for the HBCU versus the Black University is what I've been describing it as. And it was, and I can't find the picture itself, so I'll just show from the live the other night. There's the picture, the first picture I got of the three of us on the panel, Dr. Douglas on the far right, Kamau in the middle, of course. And it was a fascinating look, be more discussion about it. Talked a little bit about it Saturday night. And the work of some of the work of Andrew Douglas around cooperatives and HBCUs and some of his colleagues that have been coming up with some alternative ideas around modern monetary theory and the HBCU and some fascinating stuff. So more of that to come, but salute to all of them for that. And it was a good time there. Also, please do, if you haven't, check out Saturdays with Renee, another great episode. And make sure you have the bell rung so you don't miss any of the shows, the wonderful programming on this seminal and quite legendary platform. So, and welcome and happy Monday morning to the extent that that's even possible. So, all right. So what I thought I would do today, there's a little bit of a hodgepodge, but it is all inspired in response to something that I saw was sent to me the other day that took place at Malcolm X College, of all places, that has just really continued to irritate me, to just be frank about it. And here's the event that that's not what I nope and nope and nope. All right, that's actually fine. But as you could see here, financial literacy fair at Malcolm X College this past was that Thursday. Come join us for our financial literacy fair. Information and presentations will be provided to help you learn more about budgeting, spending habits, investing, and much more. The future, then quoting Malcolm X, the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. And with the idea that if taking Malcolm's message and reducing it to prep for financial literacy and investment, the idea that the suggestion is that the economic condition of Black people today has everything to do with a lack of prior preparation and nothing to do with, as we'll be discussing this morning, what it really is: colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, capitalism, a settler colonialism, a collage of all of those things. But this idea that at Malcolm X College, the city colleges of Chicago, that you're going to get Malcolm X associated with financial literacy is power. And that's why, again, I'm saying the only real financial literacy is political power. Financial literacy is not power. It is not even a poor substitute for political power. So in direct contradiction and conflict with this concept, that budgeting and saving and a presentation on credit 101 and investing 101 is going to in any way prepare a community for the future and become power for a community, certainly in the way that Malcolm X would have been describing it. This is just diabolical, in the words of Skip Coon. Absolutely diabolical. So uh what I just decided to do was a number of things. I looked for to see what articles might have been written that would speak directly to this issue of Malcolm and capitalism. And I'm still looking. I'll continue to look, but in the limited time that I had preparing for this morning, I didn't find any that spoke to it in the way that I was looking for. But what I was immediately struck by, again, and reminded by, is the almost endless amount. In fact, the search result, and I know they're not all highly relevant, but the search result at academia.edu for Malcolm X and capitalism, for those word terms in conjunction, search terms in conjunction, it was like 3,000 pages of response. So the point being that Malcolm X is constantly written about and talked about. The problem, as we're going to deal with, is it's often incorrectly. But the other thing that I did, and I still haven't finished this part either, uh, is I started to go through my basement library to see what books I had and what was it. Just I don't even remember everything. And again, not finished with all of any of this. And of course, all of these series are not meant to be exhaustive. They're just meant to be sort of reminders, inspiration, conversation starters, angry, cathartic releases. But so yeah, but I did find a couple of things. One of which I think is a good place to where is a good place to start is this book from 1992 by Kevin Ovenden, Malcolm X, Socialism and Black Nationalism. And one of the things Kevin does is include the what should be a more often referenced statement from Lenin, VI Lenin. Well, because I'll just read a little bit of it here. Kevin says, and I love how at least where I'm starting with it. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit because there's, right out the gate in the introduction, what Kevin is ultimately saying is that while Malcolm was assassinated February 21st, 1965, somewhat similar to what I've argued in following this logic here, clearly, is that the posthumous assassinations of his image and his ideas and his memory and his place in history has been persistent. Uh, so while he says here that Kevin, we don't know precisely who ordered his killing, but we do know for sure that the entire establishment breathed a sigh of relief. A British MP referred to Malcolm as North America's leading exponent of apartheid. The London Times called him a black extremist who advocated the destruction of the whites. The following editorial appeared in the New York Times the day after his murder. Malcolm X had all the ingredients for leadership, but this ruthless and fanatical belief in violence not only set him apart from the responsible leaders of the civil rights movement and the overwhelming majority of Negroes, it also marked him out for notoriety and a violent end. Malcolm X's life was strangely and pitifully twisted, but this was because he did not seek to fit into the society or into the life of his own people. The world he saw through those horn-rimmed glasses of his was distorted and dark. But he made it darker still with his exaltation of fanaticism. Yesterday, someone came out of the darkness that he spawned and killed him. By the way, yet again, these are the memories I have of how the press and media and the society addressed themselves to Malcolm and Dr. King while they were alive or shortly after their assassinations. and certainly posthumously in the rebranding of them and the movements that they were a part of. But this is also why I was saying the other day that I still hate museums, because this is what you all actually think of these people. So when you start to fake like you're commemorating these histories, I'm not with it. But as Kevin Ovenden points out, such sentiments were not confined to white defenders of the system. Black syndicated columnist Carl T. Rowan, some of us remember folks like him well. Malcolm was an ex-convict, ex-dope peddler who became a racial fanatic, a Black who preached segregation and race hatred. Civil rights leader Bayard Rustin, getting his own popular rebranding lately. And as I pointed out, remember I told you during when we talked about the film that the Obamas produced about Rustin, the way Malcolm and Black Power were demeaned in that film. Well, Rustin said, well, as Kevin Ovenden says here, Bayard Rustin called on people to bury Malcolm's ideas with him. Quote, now that he is dead, we should resist the temptation to idealize Malcolm X, to elevate charisma to greatness. Malcolm is not a hero of the movement. He is a tragic victim of the ghetto, end quote. Wow, Bayard. Wow, Bayard. Who let him get it? Who? That would be an interesting follow-up little research project. What were the responses to Rustin? Who would have ever had a regular conversation with that man after hearing or seeing that in print? Or who would ever have a positive conversation about that man without reminding of this critical error? With all he might have done right, this is a critical error. Are folks reminding it? Because that movie doesn't. But we're going to come back because Obama, we're not done with Obama this morning either. Hmm. Hmm. Yet, Walter C. Carrington of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People described Malcolm's politics as the best thing that happened to the KKK since the invention of the bedsheet. Ralph Bunche said that he was mentally depraved. Whoa. Yet, despite such abuse, Malcolm X remains today, along with Martin Luther King, the best-known figure of the Black movement of the 1960s. He has become a symbol of resistance to racism. His image is everywhere, from T-shirts to the ubiquitous poster of Malcolm standing, gun in hand, by a window above the slogan, "By any means necessary." The recognition of Malcolm's significance could even be detected back in 1965 under the welter of abuse designed to bury his memory. 9 months after Malcolm's assassination, the editors of the New York Times printed a review of the posthumously published autobiography. After describing the then conventional view of Malcolm as a violent racist fanatic, the reviewer goes on, there is, however, another view of Malcolm X, one that is increasingly prevalent among civil rights advocates, that with his death, American Negroes lost their most able, articulate, and compelling spokesman. Wow, that's wow. Don't hurt yourself, New York Times, to say something halfway almost alluding to pointing in the somewhat direction of a compliment. The liberal magazine The Nation, which in March had described Malcolm as a leader of the lunatic fringe, declared in another November review of the autobiography, this is the story of a man struck down on his way to becoming revolutionary and a liberator of his people. Ovenden goes on to talk about how Jesse Jackson and Farrakhan would go on to claim the mantle and a connection to Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam, who also claims Malcolm X's mantle. Yet Farrakhan wrote only 2 months before Malcolm's murder, quote, only those who wish to be led to hell or to their doom will follow Malcolm. The die is set and Malcolm shall not escape. Such a man as Malcolm is worthy of death, end quote. But getting to the Lenin quote, Lenin says, and this is certainly something that has suffered, Baraka said this of Malcolm, and certainly I would say it of himself and of King and really the broader movement. During the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly hounded them, received their theories with the most savage malice, the most furious hatred, and the most unscrupulous campaigns of lies and slander. After their death, attempts are made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, while at the same time robbing the revolutionary theory of its substance, blunting its revolutionary edge, and vulgarizing it. When the end quote, because obviously Lenin wasn't around to be talking about, as I'm reading here, David Dinkins, the eventual black mayor of New York, went to speak to black youth who were rioting in the Crown Heights area in 1991. He was chased away. Only hours earlier, he had ordered the cops to go in. He returned 3 days later, replete with Malcolm X baseball cap to ensure he got a hearing. In other words, people cynically, consistently will use and abuse Malcolm's image to support their own politics, because to disassociate themselves from Malcolm is simply impossible, even as you fraudulently express some sort of affinity for him. Just a couple other things quickly from the book. It just sort of recites some of what we've talked about already in this series. Where does Malcolm X stand on the questions of nationalism or socialism? Again, did I say it already? Let me continue to say it. Financial literacy is to economics what flat earth is to science. Financial literacy is to economics what flat earth is to science. And in fact, as we're going to get to, it's even worse. So to suggest that financial literacy is in any way associated with the politics of Malcolm X is, again, diabolical. So initially what I had set out to do this morning was to just, raise up again what was Malcolm X talking about when he was considering political economy and black people's relationship to it. And it never rested on financial literacy, black business, circulating a dollar, which is again a mythological marketing concept. It never rested on these, even if it passingly shined a light or shone a light on those ideas in his evolving progression. He was not rested first of all anywhere, given the untimely assassination. But he had certainly moved by the end of his life far beyond anything that could be associated with what is popularly understood as financial literacy. So, in fact, let me do what I should have done, and I wanted to. I'll finish up with Ovind in a second, but I wanted to remind folks of this really good conversation we had with Max Haven on the Remix Morning Show a couple of weeks ago. And I just want to play a couple of quick clips from it to, again, situate and remind us on what it is that financial literacy actually is and how it should be understood, and why to associate it with the politics of Malcolm X is fraudulent, anti-historical, incorrect, wrong, misleading, misdirecting, counterinsurgent, psychologically warfare engaging, cognitive warfare. It is all of those things. And again, I should have started with this point before moving on, but hey, we're getting there. It still works. So let me just play, and again, you can find this clipped on Black Liberation Media's YouTube channel, and on the Remix playlist, if you want to see the full discussion, which I would encourage everyone to go and do if you haven't already. But this is just a couple of quick clips from it, from when I, Geechee, and Amber spoke with Professor Max Haven about his work around financial literacy as colonialism.
Having me on. Yeah, I mean, financial literacy for the most part is just a scam. I hate to say it that blandly, but it is, because the reality is that it teaches young people, or even not young people, skills like entrepreneurship, about how to, manage their money, about how, to manage a household. And sure, those can be important skills, but the fact is, if you live in a completely sabotaged economy from the very beginning, those skills are not going to get you very far. We live in an economy in the United States and elsewhere where the rich just keep getting richer and taking more and more social wealth. And so it's basically like doing financial literacy for all of the people who are forced to play a losing game. And then largely what financial literacy education does is teach people to blame themselves for not being able to win at that game. And we see that pattern repeated again and again and again around the world in different places, as kind of elite institutions promote financial literacy education, sometimes for fairly good reasons, but without a holistic picture of what's actually happening within the system. So in some of my work, I've looked at financial literacy education aimed at Indigenous people in Canada, where I'm from, which, some of it does a good job of integrating Indigenous worldviews, Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous different ideas about wealth. But what it leaves out of the picture is the fact that the vast majority of us and working people in general are just being robbed. So it's, it doesn't do the work that it claims to do. And I would argue that a lot of financial literacy education is actually deeply misguiding, because it's not educating us about what is actually happening in the financial and economic worlds.
But
Thanks for drawing that out of the piece. I'm really glad for the invitation. I mean, let's go back to history and just point out that one of the ways that colonialism has worked, its ideology has worked, is by saying that the colonized person or people need to be punished for not being enough like the colonizer. And because there's structural and systemic barriers for colonized people to become like the colonizer, setting aside the fact that maybe they don't want to be like the colonizer, but even if they did, there's barriers to that: systemic racism, interpersonal racism, you name it. This provides the pretext always for the beneficiaries and authors of colonialism to say, this is why our racism and colonialism needs to persist, because the Indigenous person, Black people, other colonized people have not yet learned to sufficiently be like the colonizer, which is to say, Western Europeans, by and large. So that's a long pattern, and we can see it repeat again and again and again over the 600-year history of colonialism. And I think actually in many ways, financial literacy education is, in most of its appearances, just a repetition of that, which blames the colonized for their experience of colonization, because they are not able to emulate the norms and standards and values and practices of their oppressors. So in the context that I was studying in that article in Canada, you see this again and again. Canada's a country like the United States that's built on stolen Indigenous land with stolen Black labor, and the successive waves of exploitation of different racialized groups in the whole history thereafter. But all of that history of where the wealth even came from, on which the country is based, is erased. And instead, we take as our starting point the fact that Indigenous people in Canada are, statistically speaking, vastly poorer than non-Indigenous Canadians. And then that becomes the problem to solve. The problem becomes why are Indigenous people poor, by and large, rather than how did Indigenous people who used to be the custodians of one of the richest territories in the world 400 years after the beginning of colonization in that place become so poor? So you just erase the history and blame the oppressed for their own conditions. And then financial literacy comes around, and sometimes in quite well-meaning, genuine ways, tries to solve the problem. But the problem it's trying to solve is not the real problem. And as long as we don't actually focus on the real problem, which is the deeply ingrained structures of colonialism, structural racism, capitalism, neoliberalism, financialization, whatever we want to call those things, then we're not really going to solve the problem at all.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
All right. So again, I should have started with that earlier just to clarify what we're talking about. So when we see, so when we see people doing like what I was showing a moment ago, this stuff, we are clear that what is happening, and as Haven said, look, some people are well-meaning. They're not intending. I'm not even arguing that the folks who did this are intending to demean Malcolm or misrepresent Malcolm. I don't know about their intent. I'm only judging the outcome. The outcome demeans Malcolm and his work and his politics and ultimately his analysis and what should be our analysis, and tries to associate something that is decidedly colonial in its application and origin and foundation and purpose and function, and say that no, this is a continuation of the logic of Malcolm X. It's really diabolical. Maybe not by design or intent, but in impact, in conclusion, in the final analysis. That's what it is. So, all right. So please check the rest of that interview. And of course, all the other Remix Morning shows that you may have missed. But so in this brief book, one of the things that Ovenden does is, so again, what I'm trying to do is to just remind us and recenter where Malcolm actually was in these discussions of the economy and Black people's relationship to it. And as I've argued in my own work and elsewhere, and as others have pointed out, anywhere you might see Malcolm saying something along the lines of Black business, Black capitalism, it is decidedly before 1964. The most popular clip of him talking about buying power and Black business that is often circulated is from 1960. So by the time we're talking about Malcolm in 64 and early 65, he's clearly headed in a different direction, and understands, as we should all understand, that the problems facing Black people's relationship to the economy has nothing to do with not understanding credit, investment, stocks, and savings. All of that is just designed to blame Black people for being poor. So just to, one of the things that Ovenden does here is just to come back to the question of where was Malcolm on the questions of nationalism or socialism, which were the two dominant ideas, or two of the dominant ideas with which he was grappling. And as Ovenden points out, there can be no doubt that Malcolm X stood firmly on the left wing of the movement. His hatred of the system of both capitalist parties, his uncompromising challenge to racism, and his defense of violence when necessary put him way to the left of many of the other leading figures in the Black movement, then and now. However, he was not a socialist, even though we know nothing of what he might have become had he lived. When asked if Blacks alone will fight for change in the U.S., he answered, quote, "Yes, they'll never do it with working class whites. The history of America is that working class whites have been just as much against not only working class Negroes, but all Negroes, period, because all Negroes are working class within the caste system. The richest Negro is treated like working class Negro. There never has been any good relationship between the working class Negro and the working class whites. There can be no worker solidarity until there's first some Black solidarity. We've got to get our problems solved first. And then if there's anything left to work on, the white man's problem's good. But I think one of the mistakes Negroes make is that this worker solidarity thing, there's no such thing. It didn't even work in Russia." End quote. And that is from, well, it should have been right there, no? That's odd. The section that it's supposed to be cited in stops well before. So I don't have an actual citation for that quote. Wait a minute. I must be doing this wrong. I know people have said that it's not scholarly to put footnotes at the foot of the page and to do endnotes, but the way they've and then to group them by chapter. But why not just put it right at the page where All right, maybe I think all right. So that's quoted in Brightman's The Last Year of Malcolm X, 1967, page 46. So that would have been at the end. Again, this what Ovenden is showing. This would have been within the last year of Malcolm X's life. So that's again, once soon after he had broken with the Nation of Islam in March of 1964, he answered the question, "What do you think of socialism?" by saying, "Why speak of it? If you want someone to drink from a bottle, you never put the skull and crossbones on the label, for they won't drink." Later that year, however, Malcolm began to speak open. So which I interpret as him saying, it has a bad reputation. I'm not going to talk about socialism, but I want people to drink it. Later that year, however, Malcolm began to speak openly and favorably about socialism, saying white anti-racists tended to be socialists. He also located the source of racism at the heart of capitalism. And as quote all the time, and even found in one of the pamphlets that I found from back in the day, right there on the front of it is the quote: "It is impossible for a chicken to produce a duck egg, even though they belong to the same family of fowl. A chicken just doesn't have it within his system to produce a duck egg. It can't do it. It can only produce according to what that particular system was constructed to produce. The system in this country cannot produce freedom for the Afro-American. It is impossible for this system, this economic system, this political system, this social system, this system, period. It's impossible for this system as it stands to produce freedom right now for the black man in this country." End quote. And if we take the previous point that he was making about how to publicly engage socialism as a term with black communities, you could see, just saying, economic, political, social system, that is capitalism. That's what, any political economy produces. So it's just him saying, it seems to be him just saying, I'm not going to use these terms that get people so wrapped up. And who knows if he would have, maintained that strategy or eventually changed it. I can certainly see it. I mean, even to this day, engaging even some black nominally radical spaces with language of capitalism and socialism makes people, internally combust. So there's obviously more to it. I just wanted to check some of from that book there. I did also just quickly went back and grabbed my copy of The Death and Life of Malcolm X. We've talked a little bit about it, the second edition from Peter Goldman. And not that there's too much overt discussion of this particular question, but there is some discussion where Goldman writes, after his return to Harlem, the attentions of the socialist workers increased. This is after his trip to the continent of Africa in 1964. The socialist workers invited Malcolm back to the Militant Labor Forum, covered him heavily in their newspaper, The Militant, and offered to arrange a campus lecture tour for him. Malcolm, who needed both platforms and honoraria, was grateful for all this. He repaid the SWP's favors with some kind words and occasional reciprocal gestures, as when he opened some doors around Harlem for the party's presidential candidate, Clifton DeBerry, a blonde and extremely fair-skinned Negro. The dalliance was an exciting one for the SWP. They really jumped on Malcolm's bandwagon, one radical black journalist told me. They never made any real inroads to the brothers before. They saw Malcolm as a revolutionary becoming a socialist, and they dared hope a socialist work dared hope a socialist worker as is a member of the party. Once sitting in the folding chairs in the back of the SWP meeting hall, I asked DeBerry if he thought Malcolm might someday have taken out a card, that is membership. I can tell you this, DeBerry answered, if he had asked the Socialist Workers Party for a card, the Socialist Workers Party would not have turned him down. A strand of left rhetoric did appear in some of Malcolm's later speeches and interviews, particularly but not exclusively downtown. He continued to see color as central, but not necessarily the single motive force in his world. Malcolm began arguing that the non-white peoples of the world had not only their own Malcolm began arguing that the non-white peoples of the world had not only their non-whiteness in common, but their exploitation by the West. Occasionally, he identified capitalism straight out as an enemy. You know, you show me a capitalist, I'll show you a bloodsucker. And socialism as the almost universal system among the new third world nations coming into independence. Instead of you running downtown picketing City Hall, he told one Harlem audience, you should stop and find out what they do over there to solve their problems. This is why the man doesn't want you and me to look beyond Harlem or beyond the shores of America. I mean, they used to solve their problem. I mean, what they use to solve their problem is not capitalism. End quote.
Now listen.
So, that's Malcolm reminding us of the importance of internationalism in SOTA, solidarity of dispersed Africans, and this idea that being wedded exclusively to this country, whether we built it or not, is politically immature. But he's saying to the financial literacy crowd, capitalism doesn't solve the problem. So to those who want to, particularly those who want to associate financial literacy, which is to economics what flat earth is to science, with Malcolm X and revolution that's just, again, showing how some folks...
You know, he would step across the line. Habitually, he's a habitual line stepper.
That's what the financial literacy crowd is when they start talking about Malcolm. But, you know, sometimes we got to look at that financial literacy crowd and just tell them.
I ain't scared of you motherfuckers.
You know? So, okay. But what I found... You know what? I'm going to save that. The best for last. Let's save the best for last. In addition to what I found was just a couple of other interesting articles, and that this more or less may not exactly get to the point, but that I just thought were interesting nonetheless. And one of them, this one here, from Zarina Grewal, the 1965 in the Global Intellectual Afterlife of Malcolm X, just among, is sort of a review of 4 books, a discussion of 4 books, one of which, of course, is Manning Marables. And again, to my point, this article came out in America, or was a review copy for American Studies. You know what? I don't. Oh, by the way, I should put at least the full citations in the show description, but even if I don't or forget, or just in case, feel free to, as I've grown accustomed to doing, pause the video, make note of the citation here to the extent I can give it, and look it up on your own. I cannot provide, or don't want to be involved in providing, any links, just in case. So, but these I all got from academia.edu. So you should be able to just go there and download them as I did. But I just want to make sure that I'm not involved in the distribution of them. So, but one of my points again is that the reverberating impact of Marable's work is demonstrated here again. But there's a little bit of, I think, an error here that Grewal says that in Marable's book you get that draws upon the rich archival record, including unpublished chapters of Haley's manuscript. That doesn't happen. That doesn't really happen, but just thought I'd note that. But more specifically, what I thought was interesting here is that Grewal says that in Marable's account, Malcolm X's internationalism is firmly grounded in his parents' advocacy of Marcus Garvey's gospel of racial uplift and self-mastery. Capitalist, separatist, and pan-Africanist humanist, Garvey's vision of a transnational politics of Black liberation, Marable argues, drew on thinkers as diverse as Frederick Douglass, Andrew Carnegie, blah, 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 blah. I had slight issue with the framing of this, and I think speaks to one of the problems that I continue to have with the book, Marable's, that is, that the frame, if you're not paying close enough attention or reading it critically enough, you might miss, and certainly if you don't catch by the epilogue, that what is being done here, that all of the discussion of, to the extent there is any discussion in Marable's work of these politics, they're described ultimately as immature, so that Malcolm can be placed safely within the political confines of Barack Obama and the whole neoliberal Black political apparatus of the mid 2000s. I just went blank on all of their names. Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, that whole crew. But this sort of, again, speaks to my point that not only is Marable's book still central in a lot of these discussions, in a lot of the literature, in the scholarship around Malcolm, but at times is, I think, not properly interpreted or fully, but a little bit later, Grewal says that, talking about, well, actually, in reviewing this book here, Graham Abernathy's The Iconography of Malcolm X, I have not seen that book, but apparently it says here that he then follows the image of the Obama campaign in 2008 when it circulated with Obama's photoshopped face atop Malcolm X's body. The image of their fused bodies is a sharp contrast to President Obama's striking silence about Malcolm X, such as on the 50th anniversary of his assassination or the 2009 Muslim World Address in Egypt. After all, Obama named Malcolm X as a major intellectual influence and a favorite literary figure in his memoir, penned long before he nurtured presidential ambitions. I don't know if it's long before he nurtured those ambitions. I know that Dreams of My Father was allegedly written before he was, openly going to be a candidate, but the memoir like that is often a prelude to those kinds of campaigns. And years ago, when I read it, I understood that is Obama's reference to Malcolm, even in a positive way, in much along the line as it was done in a similar fashion to what I talked about a moment ago, and that Kevin Ovenden talked about in his book. That everybody from Mayor Dinkins to Farrakhan to Sharpton or to Jesse Jackson to even to somewhat rebrandings posthumously in the mainstream, they've all sought to. So Obama wasn't going to even part of, at least the way I took it then, the way I still interpret it, part of what Obama had to do, particularly after he lost the campaign to Bobby Rush in that first political race, and the Black community said that they didn't know who he was. He had to go back and rebrand himself as coming out of this legacy of Black political struggle. So when you write your memoir, you can't not acknowledge Malcolm X. It's also fair to say that regardless of whether you are on the political spectrum, if you are particularly anywhere along the lines of a so-called activist or a critical thinking academic or artist or really anyone, it's really difficult to say that you're not going to be exposed to Malcolm in some way or shape or form. It's also fair to say, I think, that you're not going to want to speak ill of that. And if you do have a political career in mind, even one that went the way Obama's went, you can't not. You still can. You could still. You would still have to, in that, as a matter of gaining authenticity for your Blackness, for your support from a white liberal establishment political apparatus who wants what Paul Street in his book was said of Barack Obama, Black but not civil rights Black. To get that Black authenticity enough for white liberals, you still have to have enough Black support or be seemingly Black enough to where you would say something positive about Malcolm X. Even white liberals know that their future Black representative cannot be someone Black, cannot be Black who speaks ill of Malcolm X. So anyway, I don't think that it's a confused. In other words, I don't think anyone should be confused that he would have at one point said something positive about Malcolm in his initial memoir, but then come back as a president and say nothing about Malcolm at all. And then this is. Oh, okay. Hold on. All right, I can't do it that way. I just wanted to show, because I went back and to show. The image that they were talking about here, if you all, I'm sure, remember this, just gross, just disturbing, abusive. Sorry for that on a Monday morning, by the way, but we got to be, we got to be thorough. So yeah. But just back to Grewal's article here, similarly, Abernethy's third period, the author talking about the symbolism of Malcolm, the era of hip hop begins with Spike Lee's 1992 film Malcolm X and extends to contemporary hip hop artists who inherit all of the different iconic representations of Malcolm X, remixing images, versions, and visions of the man, often in surprising and inventive ways. But again, I to the extent I'm getting it right, what is being said here, I again want to challenge this framing. Spike Lee's film did not popularize for hip hop artists or that generation Malcolm's symbol. Spike Lee's film was a response to an already re-engagement with Malcolm X as a symbol, and that was taking place within hip hop, I think, more organically, and was meant, that is Spike Lee's film, to negate that. And Malcolm's film certainly was a negation of the an attempt to negate a radical interpretation of Malcolm X. So, as we talked about in the previous weeks in this series here at Black Liberation Media, which, by the way, if you have not liked, shared, subscribed, or supported the Patreon of this wonderful platform, you should address yourself to that. I do like the recognition of Malcolm X being a practitioner of the science of imagery, referring to his own statement about the U.S. mastering the science of imagery. Malcolm X consistently argued the oppression of U.S. Blacks was a human rights, not civil rights issue that ought to be brought before the United Nations, a prospect Dalutsai, that is Sohail Dolutsai's book, Black Star Crescent Moon, the Muslim International Black Freedom. That's the book being discussed here, where, forgive my mispronunciations, by the way, but one, again, message, Malcolm was an internationalist and didn't think we could get our problems solved by addressing ourselves exclusively to the United States. Dalit demonstrates that this deeply worried officials in the U.S. State Department and Justice Department in 1964 and 65, which again means if you tie yourself exclusively to the United States, you're doing the bidding of the State Department. I think that's a fair way of framing it. That they want Black people to only wed our hopes and political aspirations to this place. Leaving the Nation of Islam allowed Malcolm X to pursue his longstanding interests in alliances and collaborations with other activists. However, Dalit challenges what he calls Marable's liberal account of Malcolm X embracing the civil rights movement at the end of his life, as well as his acquiescence to neo-Orientalist framings of Islamic radicalism. So salute. I have not read that work, but salute to Dalit for that point. And as I've pointed out many times, Marable on one hand reads the ballot or the bullet speech as a mature acceptance of electoral politics as a means to Black liberation. Dalit, on the other hand, counters that Malcolm X's consistent skepticism about the possibilities of racial justice through elections and legislation and his language of decolonization constituted a far more radical vision. Now, the book there focuses on religion and Islam and a radical vision of Islam. But as I would just want to remind folks that this was similar to my own argument in our Alive reinvention, that making specific reference to Marable's reduction and truncating of statements from Malcolm X regarding elections to reduce them to something that could be couched within the confines of the mature liberal Democratic Party approach to electoral politics. But Malcolm's approach to the ballot was far more militant and radical and involving much more grassroots involvement in determining who the candidate would be, what politics the candidate would run on, and so on and so forth. So salute to all of that. More discussion of how Malcolm and Martin were pitted against one another. Dalit readers guides readers through a stunning archive of films, novels, music, speeches, poetry, and music. Oh yeah, it is said in here twice. Black Star Crescent Moon disrupts the boundary between intellectual history and cultural history, tracing Malcolm X's influence on the revolutionary action movement and Black power, but also in the Black arts movement, most compellingly in hip hop. And that's why Spike Lee's film was so well supported by the Black bourgeoisie and mainstream media. Since the figure of Malcolm X is so thoroughly saturated with both street credibility and Islamic legitimacy for Muslim youth around the world, Muslim religious leaders from a wide range of Muslim sects and traditions compete to claim him as their own. So apparently within the Muslim world, the same thing is happening as in the Black political world and elsewhere. Everybody wants to claim Malcolm because he's too big to fail. Yeah. All right. One more before the finale here. I just wanted to because serendipitously the search that I did brought back an article that I haven't read in a while. It was happy to revisit, and that my Africana Studies homeboy, Dr. Jonathan Fenderson, wrote, and that references me a little bit. So it was a fun reminder read towards the gentrification of Black power. Black Power Studies, and this is from 2013, Race and Class. Black Power Studies has emerged as one of the most exciting and dynamic subfields in Africana studies, African American history, and American history. And no small player in this refashioning process. Historian Peniel Joseph occupies an important place in the subfield of Black Power Studies. In fact, it is Joseph who coined the term Black Power Studies and is broadly credited for inaugurating the subfield in his watershed essay, Black Liberation Without Apology, reconceptualizing the Black Power movement. Fenderson goes on to talk a little bit more about Joseph's positioning, support, his promotion on popular media, including PBS, as their sort of political spokesperson. And then asks, what do we gain by revealing the hidden, forgotten, or overlooked historic connections between Black Power and Barack Obama, which is a question that Black Power studies and Peniel Joseph have had at the time centered. Of course, here's where we get to the good part. On 15 March 2010, Joseph appeared on the Midday Jazz and Justice show on Washington, D.C.'s Pacifica radio station WPFW. Hosted by Jared Ball, professor at Morgan State University. The show emerged as an important venue for commentary, critique, and exchange of Black progressive and radical ideas in the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area and on the internet. Conscious of the show's existence as part of the Black counterpublic, Ball intentionally explores topics that are explicitly anti-racist, anti-capitalist, radical, and anti-imperialist. Ball's show and accompanying website constitute a multimedia space where Black progressive intellectuals and radical grassroots activists dialogue about the myriad problems facing Black America and the broader African world. It is a space where scholarly discourse meets social activism, where Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow, is put into conversation with Howard University students against mass incarceration. I actually forgot about that. And where scholars on Malcolm X interact with members of the Malcolm X grassroots movement. It was this venue where scholarly discourse publicly intersects with contemporary political engagement that Joseph entered to chew the fat about dark days, bright nights. The hour-long discussion between Ball and Joseph initially exhibited signs of a routine stop on a promotional book tour, but quickly escalated into a wrangle between the host and guest. For Ball, the crust of the dust-up was about political clarity and historical accuracy regarding Black Power. However, Joseph was more concerned with whether or not the president, that is Obama, represented an extension, culmination, or product of the movement as he expressed it on the show, or did the Black politician in fact embody the antithesis, as host Ball maintained. As the show progressed, it became evident that Joseph and Ball were neither going to see eye to eye on the issue, nor cede ground to one another. They reached an impasse, with Ball challenging Joseph's rendering of Black Power and its legacies, and Joseph accusing Ball of sloganeering. I forgot about that part too. Oh, and this was a fun thing to remember, man. Rest in power to Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon. But boy, oh boy, did we have, let me speak for myself. God rest the dead. You know what I mean? I had a hell of a good time chopping it up with, in particular, Bruce on this subject, because if I remember correctly, Glenn was not interested in Peniel or none of that. He did write a compelling essay, critical of Marable's book that was published in the Third World Press edition of Critical Essays, but he was not, he didn't want to just spend too much time on that. It was Bruce who really dug in. And I remember, and I kept it even for a while. I might still have it. Peniel Joseph leaving me voicemails talking about basically, please call off Bruce. Tell Bruce that, and I was like, I don't have no control over Bruce Dixon, and I probably agree with whatever he's going to write, and I damn sure did. That's when in those exchanges where Joseph told me he wanted to be the next Gates, because I said, man, you trying to be Henry Louis Gates, and he took it as a compliment. But in the ensuing weeks, Black Agenda Report, a weekly online political journal and Black commentary site, picked up on the debate. Managing editor Bruce Dixon chimed in by posting an article that held no punches. His piece titled Dr. Joseph Peddles Slick Marketing Constructs as Black History insisted that Joseph was guilty of spinning fables and writing histories that reinforce rather than challenge illegitimate power, ill-gotten wealth, and undeserved privilege. Shortly thereafter, Dixon's broadside was followed by an ambitious update that read, and I remember why, because Joseph was heated. Jared, tell Bruce to stop. He's not beat. Dr. Joseph contacted us and took strong exception, not only to what was written above, but to the notion that his brief appearance on Dr. Ball's Jazz and Justice show adequately conveyed either of the book's thesis or the direction of his work. By the way, I remember that too. And Joseph, and that was part of our back and forth too. That the one part that Fenderson's article here does not bring up is that the only reason Joseph was only on the show for an hour of what was then a 2-hour show is because at the last minute, he said he had a household emergency that required that he only be on for an hour. So to suggest that he showed up briefly, which was still an hour, and that this brief appearance did not allow for his adequate conveyance of his book's thesis, that's some nonsense. He graciously offered to send us copies of his 2 books, which we intend to read, review here on Bar, and afterward donate to our local library. And if it looks like we misjudged his work, we will not hesitate to say so here or anywhere. Dixon remained true to his word and just a few months later published a 2-part review that cut even deeper into Joseph's book. The first book lambasted the historian for his inability to analytically engage with imperialism and identify America's praxis of empire, as many Black Power advocates did during the movement. The second segment took a square look at Joseph's uneven and inconsistent uses of democracy throughout the text, a point I'll revisit below. Yeah, this article is very good. Barr published another detailed review of the book by Anthony Montero, professor of African American Studies at Temple at the time, no longer. Longtime activist and former Communist Party candidate for Congress, Montero reiterated many of Ball and Dixon's concerns, including those revolving around democracy and Obama's domestic and foreign policy. Yeah, Obama mania, that was real. Joseph working with PBS. Joseph, much like mainstream American media, elides explicit anti-capitalist politics in order to firmly situate Black power within a normalized, legitimate, and nonetheless skewed liberal history of American democratic process. In Joseph's work, as in conventional media discussions on PBS and more popular networks, the full political spectrum is curtailed and distorted, therefore limiting the span of possible political horizon. Joseph, much like the mainstream American media, elides explicit anti-capitalist politics in order to firmly situate Black power within a normalized, legitimate, and nonetheless skewed liberal history of American democratic progress. That, again, perfectly summarizes my arguments against Joseph, my arguments against mainstream representations, the ones that Joseph's work still in Marable's, as a disciple of Marable, and much like Marable, still impacts and influences Netflix and Hulu documentaries and series and other people's scholarship. But by suppressing a discussion, an honest and accurate discussion of Black power, and specifically Malcolm X's anti-capitalism, their work allows for, again, a conveyance of the idea that that Obama was an offshoot of that, or that Black Lives Matter is an extension of those politics, or all of those kinds of errors. And that's how we end up with financial literacy, talking about, people talk about financial literacy in Malcolm X, or people talking about, Black Lives Matter as an extension of past revolutionary movements. This is how we, and again, they are the antithesis of those movements, or should be understood more along those lines. So But salute to Dr. Fenderson and whose article I'm not doing justice, but I just wanted to enjoy that memory, and I'm glad the article came up in the search. But where I do want to conclude this morning, one of the nice little serendipitous moments of this revisiting or this revisitation was that I went back and found my copy of Black Awakening in Capitalist America by Robert Allen, where, and I hope you all don't mind this, for a solid 10 pages or so, he revisits Malcolm in a brilliant and impressive way, couching him again, as we did last week, within the histories and context of Robert Williams and the Cuban Revolution and other global political movements. But starting around page 30, Robert Allen starts by saying, says that in Robert Williams' case, the authorities sought to suppress a militant and potentially dangerous to them movement by destroying its leadership. A few years later, a variation of this technique, political assassination, would be used in an effort to destroy the young movement which had sprung up around Malcolm X. Malcolm, the ideological father of the Black Power movement, I mean, I didn't even plan that, but come on, man.
Message.
I mean, given what we were just looking at with Peniel Joseph's, here we go, right out the gate. The ideological father, Malcolm, the ideological father of the Black Power movement, and one man to whom Harlem's angry masses looked for new leadership, was killed just 50 weeks after he officially broke with the Nation of Islam, the Black Muslims. During that year of his life, Malcolm made 2 trips to Africa and the Middle East, which seriously influenced his thinking. He began carefully to reevaluate the social and political ideas which he had accepted while in the Muslims. He set up the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which we're going to talk more about in this series, 100 Years of Malcolm X, which of course was patterned after the Organization of African Unity, which he hoped would implement his new ideas and launch a decisive attack on the problems confronting Blacks in America. Assassin's bullets cut down this new beginning before it bore fruit. Malcolm had become a follower of Elijah Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, while serving a 10-year prison sentence for armed robbery. Let me skip ahead some of the biographical stuff. And just skipping ahead a little bit of the recap of his time with the NOI, and accepting the Nation of Islam approach to politics. And then he talked about how Malcolm realized the need for effectively to attack racism and exploitation. He called himself a disciple of Black nationalism, which he carefully defined as the effort of Blacks to organize a movement of their own to fight for freedom, justice, and equality. The kernel of Black nationalism, he said, was the idea that Black people should control the economy, politics, and social institutions of their communities. Thus, he identified Black nationalism within the general concept of self-determination. After the split with the nation, Malcolm no longer endorsed utopian separatism, the doctrine that Blacks should return to Africa or devote their efforts to set up a Black state in the United States. He still rejected integrationism as either phony tokenism or an attempt to assimilate Blacks into a decadent white society. Unlike Muslims, the Muslims who attributed the cause of Black oppression to the evil of the white race, Malcolm realized it was in the structure of society to which one could trace not only the roots of Black people's misery, but also the genesis of white racism itself. In his speech in May of 1964, Malcolm argued, quote, "The system in this country cannot produce freedom for an Afro-American. It is impossible for this system, for this economic system, political system, social system, period. It is impossible for this system as it stands to produce freedom right now for the Black man in this country." In answer to a question from the audience, he said, it's impossible for a white person to believe in capitalism and not believe in racism. You can't have capitalism without racism. And if you find someone and you happen to get that person into a conversation and they have a philosophy that makes you sure they don't have this racism in their outlook, usually they're socialists or their political philosophy is socialism, end quote. He thus carefully and consciously avoided falling into the defeatist trap of attributing racism to, quote, human nature. And I'm with that. At minimum, white folks have to be socialists. I mean, facts. Although he advocated self-determination for blacks, Malcolm understood that this could never be achieved within the framework of an exploitative capitalist system. This is
Message.
Now listen.
That's where I constantly run into my own struggles with trying to figure a way out and some of the arguments. Again, unlike other black nationalists, Malcolm realized that it was in the interests of militant blacks to work for change throughout American society. Oh, I remember around here getting a lot of grief from folks that used to be around here for making that point. And I was like, well, I'm for it is only if the total society is changed that the possibility of genuine self-determination for blacks can be realized. Black control of black communities will not mean freedom from oppression so long as black communities themselves are still part of or subservient to an outside society which is exploitative. Malcolm did not live long enough to elaborate fully on the program of action. He did advocate that blacks engage in block voting, although he noted that sometimes, as in 1964, there was not much choice between Republican Wolf and the Democratic Fox. In its statement of aims, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which Manning Marable's book truncates, literally cuts off they stated that organize the Afro-American community block by block to make the community aware of its power and potential. We will start immediately a voter registration drive to make every unregistered voter in the Afro-American community an independent voter. We propose to support and organize political clubs to run independent candidates for office and to support any Afro-American already in office who answers to and is responsible to the Afro-American community, end quote. Marable cuts that off. Cha-cha! Yeah. So that when you read Marable's work in his section on voting, what Malcolm says about voting, you think it's okay to support Obama. But Robert Allen in 1990, 91, 92, somewhere around, he already said, he predicted what Marable was going to do 20 some odd years, 30 years later, and said, don't do that. In the economic sphere, the OAAU merely pledged that it would wage an unrelenting struggle against economic exploitation of all forms. Malcolm realized that the system he opposed was based ultimately upon force, and that the dynamic of radical social change in America was moving inexorably toward a violent confrontation. Again, he's speaking to what all these black capitalists misread history. They leave that part out, that this system is based ultimately by force. You're not just going to black business yourself into, parity. In a speech in New York on April 8th, 1964, Malcolm described the process he saw unfolding. So today, when the black man starts reaching out to what America says are his rights, the black man feels that he is within his rights. When he becomes the victim of brutality by those who are depriving him of his rights to do whatever is necessary to protect himself. An example of this was taking place last night at this same time in Cleveland, where the police were putting water hoses on our people there and also throwing tear gas on them. And they met a hail of stones, a hail of rocks, a hail of bricks. A couple of weeks ago in Jackson, Florida, a young teenage Negro was throwing a Molotov cocktails. How come where was that part in Eyes on the Prize 3? Well, Negroes didn't do this 10 years ago, but what you should learn from this is that they are waking up. It was stones yesterday, Molotov cocktails today. It will be hand grenades tomorrow, and whatever else is available the next day. There are 22 million African Americans who are ready to fight for independence right here. I don't mean any nonviolent fight or turn the other cheek fight. Those days are over. Those days are gone. As though he wanted to be certain that his audience, which was mostly white, had not misunderstood, Malcolm added that the Black Revolt was being transformed into a, quote, real Black revolution. Revolutions are never fought by turning the other cheek. Revolutions are never based upon love your enemy and pray for those who spitefully use you. And revolutions are never waged singing "We shall overcome." Revolutions are based on bloodshed. Thus, Malcolm saw that Black Revolt metamorphosing into a violent revolution. But strangely, at the end of the speech, he seemed to retreat from the position he had taken throughout his talk. America, he said, is the first country on this earth that can actually have a bloodless revolution. Why did he think this was so? Because the Negro in this country holds the balance of power. And if the Negro in this country were given what Constitution says he is supposed to have, the added power the Negro in this country would sweep all of the added power of the Negro in this country would sweep all of the racists and the segregationists out of office. It would change the entire political structure of the country, end quote. This was clearly inconsistent with the major thrust of his speech. Malcolm had no faith in the efficacy of political reform. Only a few moments earlier, he had pointed out that the Black man can quote, see where every maneuver that America has made supposedly to solve the race problem has been nothing but political trickery and treachery of the worst order, end quote. Malcolm apparently held ambivalent attitudes on the question of violence. He advocated self-defense, yet he knew that no revolution was made using the tactics of self-defense. Robert Allen, rest in power. That's a sharp way of putting it. He advocated self-defense, yet he knew that no revolution was made using the tactics of self-defense. He knew that the Black Revolt held the potential of turning into a revolution, and that revolutions involve aggressive violence. Yet he could conclude that America might be the first country to experience a bloodless revolution. This ambivalence probably stemmed from misgivings Malcolm had about potential allies. He knew that for the Black Revolution to succeed, it needed revolutionary allies, and he saw two possible sources of such allies: militant whites in the United States and the people of the newly emerging nations, the former colonies of Africa and Asia, and the oppressed people of Latin America. But he had grave doubts about so-called white radicals. He thought that many of them could not seriously identify with a struggle, the aim of which was to undermine and destroy the basic premises and institutions of their own society.
Now listen!
And we got to throw the Black bourgeoisie in that group. Got to. If I've learned nothing over the last few years of my particular focus and work, got to add them. Got to shake them loose. He thought that many of them could not seriously identify with a struggle, the aim of which was to undermine and destroy the basic premises and institutions of their own society. The remainder, he thought, would probably be co-opted. Quote, you can cuss out colonialism, imperialism, and all other kinds of isms, but it's hard for you to cuss that dollarism. When they drop those dollars on you, your soul goes. So let your soul go. That's the Malcolm X remix. As far as white workers were concerned, he had no faith at all that they could be anything but reactionary and racist. With beliefs such as these, it would be natural for Malcolm to hesitate to advocate that blacks undertake anything more than self-defense. His major concern, wisely, was to prevent genocide, not encourage it. He knew that in revolutionary situation, only the presence of revolutionary forces outside the black communities could prevent mass slaughter of the black population. He saw no such forces in evidence and therefore was forced to equivocate, torn between the seemingly conflicting needs of racial survival and social revolution. Damn, Robert Allen was on it. In spite of his reservations about white radicals and militants, Malcolm still regarded them as potential allies. He believed that some whites were genuinely fed up with the system, and he thought that some type of alliance might occur if they could establish proper communication with black militants. Quote, proper communication, end quote, to Malcolm's mind, definitely was not the kind of black-white alliances that existed in the past in which the black component was usually only an appendage to white-controlled organization. In any case, such an alliance was for the moment only a secondary consideration. The first was the creation of black unity. Militant blacks, he said, had to consolidate their own forces, work out their own program and strategy, and build a strong movement before there could be any meaningful move toward an alliance with whites. The immediate goal of white militants, Malcolm thought, should be to build a viable movement within white communities. Any link up that might occur would be between equals. It was in Africa in the last year of his life that he saw the best and most numerous allies of American blacks. He was implacably opposed to the thesis that since black people are only a minority in this country, they should accept the leadership of white liberals. Malcolm argued that black people should identify with the majority of the world's oppressed and downtrodden peoples and elevate the black freedom struggle to the level of an international struggle for human rights. It's just one.
Now listen.
Just one after another. Malcolm believed that the people of Africa, Asia, and Latin America were victims of the international power structure, that U.S. neocolonialism was the main weapon of this power structure, but that the colonial revolt had shown the enemy to be invincible no longer. International capitalism, he believed, was slowly being beaten back and replaced with various kinds of socialisms, not financial literacy programs. At an OAAU rally in Harlem, December 20, 1964, less than a month after his last return from Africa, Malcolm said, quote, almost every one of the countries that has gotten independence has devised some kind of socialistic system and this is no accident. This is another reason why I say to you that you and I here in America who are looking for a job, who are looking for better housing, looking for a better education, before you start trying to be incorporated or integrated or disintegrated into the capitalistic system, should look over there and find out that what are the people who have gotten their freedom adopting to provide themselves with better housing and better education and better food and better clothing. None of them are adopting the capitalistic system because they realize they can't. You can't operate a capitalistic system unless you are vulturistic. You have to have someone else's blood to suck to be a capitalist. You show me a capitalist, I'll show you a bloodsucker. That capitalism in its colonial quest bred racism was self-evident to Malcolm. In his view, this partly accounted for the presence of racism in a supposedly egalitarian America. That same America had profited greatly from the colonial slave trade, and now she stood as the last bulwark of capitalism. Urging that U.S. blacks internationalize their fight for freedom, Malcolm contended that black people as victims of domestic colonialism should view their struggle in terms of the worldwide anti-colonial revolt, and he took concrete steps to make this more than mere rhetoric. He formulated a plan for linking the domestic freedom movement to the international anti-colonial revolt. The civil rights struggle, he reasoned in his April address in New York, involves the black man taking his case to the white man's court. But when the black man fights it at the human rights level, it is a different situation. It opens the door to take Uncle Sam to the world court. Uncle Sam should be taken to court and made to tell why the black man is not free in the so-called free society. Uncle Sam should be taken into the UN and charged with violating the UN Charter of Human Rights. At another point, Malcolm drew an analogy to give clarity to his argument. If South Africa is guilty of violating the human rights of Africans, then America is guilty of worse violations of the rights of 22 million Africans on the American continent. And if South African racism is not a domestic issue, then American racism is not a domestic issue. End quote. Salute to Robert Allen. Salute to Malcolm X. And salute to all of you who have joined us this morning for our continuing series of 100 Years of Malcolm X right here on Black Liberation Media. I am again Jared Ball, happy to be your host. If you have not done so already, please like, share, subscribe, put this show and others from this platform in your socials, invite others to join you, tag Black Liberation Media when you do so, drop a comment as well. And thank you once again to Hiram Rivera for the idea. And again, for all of you for joining me. And big salute again. And thanks to Malcolm X. It's been another fun exploration of his ideas and work. I'm really enjoying this series and we look forward to continuing it next week. And just want to close by again reminding that financial literacy is to economics what flat earth is to science. Malcolm X and any true revolutionary, even radical, even progressive, knows that financial literacy is nothing but an extension of colonialism, has nothing to do with why people are poor, and will have nothing to do with ending the poverty of particularly Black people, but certainly any other community. So again, thanks everybody. Much love, more struggle, and more political power to us all. Peace, again, only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, and I'll catch you next time right here at...
And what did you sacrifice? Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight have set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.